Special thanks to the town of Vail for their support of the Vail Dance Festival and Conversations on Dance live podcast recordings. This episode was recorded live at the Manor Vail Lodge. I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Where my other half is. She is awaiting the arrival of her firstborn any day now. So Rebecca will be back next year for sure, but we do miss her. But I'm feeling lucky that for my first moment flying solo, I have someone I've known for nearly 20 years now, the incomparable Tony Award-winning choreographer, Justin Peck. Thank you for joining us, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
So last year, you talked with me and Rebecca and Robbie Fairchild a little bit, but at that point, we were all really excited for the imminent premiere of West Side Story, which, like everything else, had been delayed because of COVID. So now we're on the other side of it. I mean, it couldn't have gone better in terms of, audience reception, critical reception, awards galore. But I want to go back to the beginning and just hear a little bit about how you first became even involved with the project.
Yeah. So I first heard about this rumored project of this West Side Story reimagination by Spielberg. Actually, when I was down working with Miami City Ballet, and I remember, when you have a memory and you remember where you were in the world. I remember being in Wynwood, and we were actually shooting this dance film for a ballet I was choreographing called Heatscape, and Michael was actually dancing in that film, and it was kind of like a grassroots film that we were trying to make to help promote that ballet as almost as its own little movie trailer of sorts. And I heard about this this project that was in the works, but I didn't think much of it. It was something that just felt so far away from where I was and what I was doing. And I think that was in 2014 when we were shooting that. Yeah, it was December 2014. Mm-hmm. And I guess cut to 3 years later, I get a note from Tony Kushner, who's a screenwriter and the great American playwright. And he sends me a quick message just saying hey, I want to talk to you about something. Can we grab a coffee? And so I sat down with Tony Kushner, and he was telling me how he's been working on this reimagination with Spielberg for a little while now, and they're really interested in talking to me about it, and they want me to read the script. And so that was kind of the first exposure to the project on the inside. And so they sent me the script, and at first I was skeptical about the project because the original is such a huge part of our history with film and with dance on film, mm-hmm. and has been a huge source of inspiration for me. And I didn't want to mess with it. And so I read the script with some skepticism. And what I found was that Tony wrote this script that somehow it somehow honored what came before. It was sort of reverent of what came before, but it also found ways to reinvent and to dig deeper into certain characters and character dynamics and story beats, and even with a lot of the song and dance numbers, he was able to recontextualize several of them so that they actually communicated something different than what was communicated in the original. And so that's what really excited me about the project. So after I read that, I was oh, there's actually room to be creative here. It's not just about remounting what had existed before.
Right.
And so I was interested at that point. And so they followed up with an offer to meet with Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner, and then the lead producer, Christy McCosco. And so I met with them. Another very vivid memory of meeting them in a kind of a hotel suite in New York City. Steven had just been nominated for a bunch of awards for The Post. I don't know if anyone has seen that film, but it's a great film as well, and has rhythm to it and movement and great, just great storytelling and filmmaking. So they were in New York to kind of like prepare for all the chaos of like that award season. And I was able to like sit down with them. And I remember going to their hotel room, and I sat down, and I was wearing this hat, this like baseball cap that had a bunch of sharks on it. And I hadn't put two and two together, but I sat down, and Steven said to me, he was like, "I like your hat." Of course, like in retrospect, I realized this is the man who made Jaws. But so that was like a great memory. And we just kind of like sat together and we talked for about an hour and a half. He had looked at a bunch of my work for the stage. And I think at that point I was working on Carousel on Broadway. So he was excited to see that in a couple months from that point. And so we had a great meeting, and then Tony called me about an hour after the meeting ended, and he was like, "We want you to come on board and to work on this." And I said yes in the moment, but in the back of my head, I was like, I'm not really saying yes to this. I'm actually going to like take some time to like think this through, because it sounds sort of like there's so many ghosts in this content and this the show that is West Side Story. And so I spent a few months just like thinking about it and talking to my family and to friends and colleagues who I'm close with. And pretty much everyone was like, you have to do it. You have to go for this. And if anything, it's a chance to really learn from the experience and get to work with some incredible artists on a film. So eventually I was like, okay, I'm fully on board for this, and then we were off at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, you know, you had danced West Side Story Suite, you'd done Bernardo for years at that point, and you know, as any dancer knows, it's hard to get those ideas out of your body and your mind. And I think it's really cool that the Kushner script was what made you realize you could do that, because there were reimaginings of those moments. It's not just America on a rooftop again, or, you know, cool as it was in the original film. So I think that's cool that really informed you and like gave you the confidence that you were going to be able to move past like the Robbins that's in your body, you know, forever.
Yeah, I really credit kind of like Tony with that, and he led by example, and I just kind of like followed that in terms of, and also like in terms of how he wrote the text so that it had a lot of himself in it, and a lot of a pretty extensive amount of research he did to write this, and yet at the same time there's lines in that script that are right out of the film or right out of the stage musical. And that was also a moment where I was like, oh yeah, like we can pay homage to what was there originally and add in those quotes that audiences will be really satisfied to see.
Right.
So that was also part of the process. And I think having danced it so frequently, it was like very consistent thing that I danced during my career at New York City Ballet. Like it was the first principal part I ever danced. And then I did it for probably like 10 years. And then, so it felt like I've been studying this musical for my whole life. And so in a way, it's like I didn't have to do so much preparation. It's like it's been a process over like 20 years to understand it. So
yeah, I know for me, like as a viewer, I knew the moment that you had succeeded was when you finally do quote Robbins, because I realized I hadn't thought about his choreography once until that point, you know? So, it's just it was the snaps.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, we're back. Yeah, of course that. But like you guys were taking us into such a different, like fully expanded world. But I want to talk a little bit about the process because obviously it's very different from, you get a commission from New York City Ballet and, the parameters are a lot broader there. You can, sometimes there are directions, but usually you have a fuller range of what you can do. But I'm wondering, did Carousel prepare you at all for that? Like you're working under someone, you have to serve the vision of that work. You're one like cog in the machine, Did that kind of help you in this transition to film, or was it just still too different?
Yeah, I think Carousel was an essential step along the way. I think the thing I would say about that is working on a show like Carousel and then West Side Story, the storytelling trumps everything. It's like the most important thing. So you can come up with a cool choreographic sequence or step, but if it doesn't speak to the storytelling, then it's pointless. And that is it's so challenging, I think, because it's hard enough to come up with like interesting movement, but then to also make sure that it's speaking to character and moving the story along, is just like even more of a limiting thing, but it also once you're able to achieve that, it can be like the most gratifying thing.
Right.
But yeah, and then I guess like working with a director, I was lucky to work with Jack O'Brien on Carousel, and he was incredibly generous with me and kind of like he's a very seasoned director, and he's done everything from Shakespeare to developing and directing the original Hairspray on Broadway. And he just kind of like took me under his wing and taught me so much about the process of making a Broadway show. And I think like at the same time, the whole team and including him, they were very respectful of what I do and what I did and what I brought to the table. And I think there was real collaboration in that sense. And I felt that was similar with West Side Story and with the film as well. I think because dance is so built into the bones of it, like it's so much of the expression is danced. And so it had to be that way. And Steven Spielberg was also like incredibly generous with how he brought me into the process. And we started working together, a couple years before even going into rehearsal or shooting this. And he just really made me feel like a partner on it, which I appreciated. And it made me want to like work harder for him and for the project and for what we were making. And so I also, one of the most amazing things about it was I was able to like just like sit side by side with him for the whole making of it, from rehearsals to to dreaming up the imagery and the storytelling. Like in my office, he actually used to love to like walk from his apartment to my little office at Lincoln Center, and we would sit together and just spend a few hours a few times a week just talking through some of the sequences and some of the numbers. So that felt very collaborative. And then being in rehearsals together, that was very hands-on and interactive. And then being on set, it was, we were just sitting side by side together for a very long shoot days. So like 10, 12-hour shoot days, or even sometimes longer than that. And then for 79 days. It was a very long shoot. Most films are half that length, if that, sometimes less. So we spent a lot of time. We spent like the whole summer, like June to the end of September, shooting this film. So I learned a lot from
Right.
that. Yeah.
You are a very curious artist. You're always trying your hand at new things. I'm wondering if this time with Spielberg made you interested in filmmaking at all.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think like by the end of the process shooting it, I was already kind of like brainstorming about ideas for generating more content for film, and especially dance on film, because it's sort of, I feel like it's a special thing that I can bring to that medium. And having now learned from not just working with Steven, but I've done now several projects. We did a film with Sofia Coppola at New York City Ballet. I worked with Damien Chazelle on a commercial, just things like this that I feel like I'm able to really take advantage of the unique role that a choreographer plays on a film set, where you're having to be very close and interactive with the director. And so that's like a glimpse into what it takes to make a film. And so yeah, in the back of my head, I'm just like making notes on like, okay, this is what it's similar to actually how I started choreographing, like being in the room as a dancer and getting to work with a lot of amazing choreographers who were coming in to New York City Ballet and being present for the process, but also at the same time in the back of my head, like thinking like, okay, like this is how they do this. I like how they do this and I don't like how they do that. And I'm going to kind of like curate like how I want to embark upon my own process as a choreographer. So I feel like I'm like in this like gestation period of trying to soak up as much as I can from a lot of these film directors. And hopefully, I do have the ambition to make more work for film. So we'll see what happens. Yeah,
sure. I'm wondering if you don't have maybe like one specific story about Spielberg. I was on set for just a couple days, and I would watch him, the way he could manage things. It was so incredible. And he was always deferring to you or Patricia to make sure that component of the film was, present and being honored. Or that then, Janusz, the cinematographer, he was very collaborative, but then he knew everyone's name on set. It was kind of like this. He was just such a generous person. I'm wondering if like how that impacted your art, and if there's maybe like a specific story you have with him.
Yeah. Oh my God. There's so many things. One of the first things I noticed about him is no matter who was in the room or who was present, he made eye contact with everyone. So, and that it's like just that little gesture was something that made everyone feel included and like part of the interaction. And so that was like one of the, just like the first week working with him and going to like a dinner and being like, oh wow, everyone's like present and he's kind of like setting the table in that way. And I remember a lot of people visiting set to see him, other actors. One time the governor of New Jersey showed up. Somehow he managed to make this incredible film and also entertain anyone who was like visiting him on set. And it's so hard because you have to like multitask and make them feel welcome and host them and then, have the eye and the precision to get the shots, especially like on such a highly pressurized thing like a film set where, time is money. It's like, there's only even though it's such a large scale project, the resources are still limited. It's not totally abundant. Right. So I was really impressed by how he was able to kind of like balance all that. What else? Oh, okay. He's sort of like relatively efficient as a filmmaker. So you hear about directors who will do like 50 or 60 takes of a single shot. And he's not that way. He'll usually do like 2 to 6 takes of a shot. And so with choreography, that was like challenging because, and thank God we rehearsed so much. So it was like everyone was super prepared when we got on set to shoot. But there would be moments where it'd be like the first take, and then he'd throw off his headphones and be like, next shot, and he'd run off, and I'd be like, oh no, wait, the dance wasn't exactly right. Like, can we do one more? And he'd be like, oh yeah, sorry, I got excited. So that was another like kind of like fun dynamic on set. But there's so many stories.
Right. I'm wondering, it was delayed because of COVID, and then regardless, the reception would have been probably pretty overwhelming. The fact that critics were saying, it exceeded the original, that's just something that is completely unheard of. People aren't remaking Casablanca and Wizard of Oz with, that sort of reception. So to hear that, like, what did that feel like to be a part of a project that could, maybe to some actually surpass its original source material?
Yeah, I mean, that's like subjective, I think. That's like someone's opinion. I mean, I think it's like, it's cool to have done this version that feels like it can be reinterpreted and reimagined, and don't forget that it's Romeo and Juliet. Like, at its core, it's the original itself is a reimagination of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
Set in New York City at this specific time. One of the things I'm really proud of with this film is that there was much, much more authenticity with the casting, especially of the sharks and the Latin representation in the film. So, and that took a lot of work and a lot of energy and a lot of focus to make happen. The audition process was the most extensive thing I've ever been a part of. We went to Puerto Rico twice. We went to Miami. We went to LA. We did a bunch of auditions in New York. We spent a lot of time talking to communities and engaging with them to ensure that kind of we're on the right track with this. Hopefully this can be one version on the timeline of West Side Story, and maybe the next film or stage production can be interpreted by an actual like Puerto Rican director.
Right.
I think that would be like amazing. So my hope is that maybe this like inches things along a little bit further to then continue the dialogue with what this content is and how it can be further interpreted by different kind of points of view. And then the other thing I'll just say is that I was very inspired as a young person seeing the original West Side Story and just kind of like having like examples of men dancing and just thinking like, oh, I can do that. And it was cool. Like, it looks, I love the choreography in that original film. And we have this whole generation of actors, dancers, singers, performers who are in this film now, and I hope that they do the same thing with how they can inspire a whole next generation of dancers, and especially boys and men to think about a career in dance. Mm-hmm. So.
I want to hear a little bit more about this audition process. I'm curious. It sounds like obviously Steven was very collaborative with you, but were there moments where the input is hard because you're gonna of course fight for what you need, which is dancers, but you're seeking perfect triple threats. Like how much push pull was there in that whole process?
It was constant. Yeah, it was a constant dialogue and very challenging because. I feel like each of those leads in the film, I don't know. It's not like there was like a second one who was there that was like just, it was like the toss up between these two. It felt really much like this is the person to do this role. And like, what are we going to do if they have a conflict or something like that? It was really, challenging to cast the film, and we talk, like, we being like my immediate team, Patricia Delgado and Craig Salstein and myself, we would talk about how unique this casting process was because everyone had to be a quadruple threat, not just a triple threat, which means that they had to be exceptional at singing, dancing, acting, and also how they communicate through the camera lens. And Steven would be there during the audition process with a handheld camera to kind of get a sense of how everyone projected through the camera. And sometimes certain prospects would have, they'd be great singers, dancers, actors, but something about how they communicated through the camera just like wasn't quite right. And that would be enough to like not cast them. It was really, really tough, and very, very specific. And I'm really proud of the fact that everyone delivers a fully authentic performance on camera with their, not just their acting, but their singing and their dancing. There's no body doubling. There's no face replacement, which is, something that we can do nowadays with technology, and it's done. But I wanted to have a cast that was actually doing all the work that we're seeing on camera, and we were able to accomplish that. And so it's a huge thing, I think, for the dance community to have that.
For sure. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about your output for stage in the past year. I just watched for the first time last night Become a Mountain, which was such a great work. And it was your first time working with Juilliard. Is that right? Yeah. And it basically, I want to hear about the music, because you use the work of Dan Deacon, who you worked very successfully with in the past for Times of Racing. But, Become a Mountain is like a 4-minute long pop electric moment, but then it has sort of like this sparse opening and then this like really dizzying coda. But did those exist, or did Deacon tell me about that conversation?
That started with the invitation from Alicia Graf Mack, who's the Dean of Dance at Juilliard, and she's just like this wonderful leader that for me, I'm just like, I want to work for this person. So COVID wiped out my schedule, and she reached out to me and she was like, can you come make a new dance in like 6 months from now or whatever? And I was like, I actually can. So let's do it. But I want to there's this song that I'm fixated on by Dan Deacon called Become a Mountain. And I want to work with him to expand it into like a full blown, dance kind of soundscape. And she was like, okay, let's do it. And so I started to work with Dan on this, and we talked about structure and ideas, and the fact that like the song proper would be the kind of like eye of the hurricane. So it'd be like right in the middle. And he started to think about music arrangement, and he built out this whole, introduction that leads up to that song in the most glorious way. And he wrote it for player piano. And player piano is, it's like those ghost pianos you see like in Nordstrom's when you're walking by and they're like playing like lobby music. But you can actually write for those pianos in a way that is nearly impossible for like the human hands to play. So he wrote this score for live player piano, which was kind of incredible. So for the performance, we actually had a player piano in the pit that was like, that had a light on it. So you can kind of see this like ghost piano playing. And then we went into the song proper, and then we talked about building it out into this like kind of massive, cosmic universe. And that was all written for like brass and electronics and strings, and which he loves to write in that way. And so, and that just became this whole kind of like parade march for the dancers. And it was really interesting to work with them because they're different from New York City Ballet, obviously. I mean, they have a different kind of training, and I was just curious by I guess like what I would bring and what they would bring, and the kind of collaboration that would occur, the kind of chemistry that would occur between these moving parts. And I think it influenced the work in a very unique way, which was something I was excited about, that it could show kind of further range in my own choreographic work. And so, but it was, I think that they were all a little bit nervous when I first got there, because they were like, who's this ballet choreographer showing up to make something? I thought I was going to make like Allegro Brilliant or something and then I was like, no, it's going to be like, this is going to be a sneaker dance. So everyone was in sneakers, and it just kind of like dropped the weight a little bit. And then we embarked upon the process, and we kind of like found our way in this, in the moment. I think that's what it felt like. So.
Right. And shortly after that, Partita, which we'll be seeing on tonight's program here in Vail, was your first City Ballet live premiere since the pandemic. So it's music by Caroline Shaw, who you clearly just love working with. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Caroline, and how you first kind of got to realize that you guys were such close artistic souls?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really through the Vail Dance Festival that I built a relationship with Caroline. I think it's great that Damien brings her every summer now, or at least consistently for the past few years, to work and write and interact with new dance creations. And she's just so good at doing that. She's super collaborative and super open and really smart, and has an innate ability to write dance music, which is a rare thing. Mm-hmm. And I've always just enjoyed the process of working with her. And I knew of her music before coming to the festival and getting to work with her. Actually, like when she wrote the Partita, it's this work that really sort of put her on the map as a composer. It was the first like major serious work that she wrote, and I think it came out in 2013, if I'm correct, maybe 2014. And it ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize for music and turned a lot of heads. I think people were like, oh, who is this new voice in music? And I spent like a decade listening to that piece. And finally, after working with Caroline a few times here at the festival, I felt ready to attempt a dance to this score, which is incredibly dense and precise and musical, and it's for 8 a cappella voices. So, and it's what's cool about it is it's not necessarily like opera singing. It's very dynamic and feels like it has dance motion to it. And there's so much more to say about that score, but I'll just say that like it was such a pleasure to get to interact with, and also like I'm never like in my own sort of like process of solitude of developing my like map for making a dance. Like it was the most challenging piece I've worked with, I think.
For that piece, because, Caroline's written expressly for new work for you as well, but this is, a hugely acclaimed older existing work. Did you have conversations with Caroline directly about it? I mean, she didn't make any adaptations, I imagine, but...
Yeah, I mean, I asked her to go on a walk, and we went through Central Park, and I just like asked her a ton of questions about the score, just like her process writing it, and where the inspiration came from, and so there's some lyrics in it, and then some moments of just the sound of the voice, and those lyrics are mostly inspired by the Saluit instructional drawings that were on display at Mass MoCA. I think they might still be on display there. And they're this incredible collection of instructional drawings. And I actually saw them. I went on a road trip through New England, and we stopped there. And I saw them kind of like around the same time that I think Caroline first looked at them as well, and it's kind of inspired her to write this piece. But you'll hear in the dance, if you see it tonight, that it starts with these lyrics that feel almost like you're reading like an instruction manual to like an IKEA piece of furniture. And those are all pulled from like these instructions to actually like recompose these drawings. And And to me, that felt very like dimensional, and how that can influence like building out a dance. And so we kind of like start in this, it almost look like visually, it looks like we're assembling or like building out this dance, and then it takes a turn and goes on like this whole other journey. So yeah, I mean, she was very generous with like sharing about it, which was great. And then, the group actually got to perform with us, with New York City Ballet for the premiere, which was very special as well. And she's a member of this group, Roomful of Teeth. And so she was actually in the pit, along with her colleagues, and they sang it live. And, so that was a really special thing as well.
Right.
But I also feel like I'm excited about the recording too. Like there's something about it, being performed to the recording that feels like almost, I mean, I love both versions, but it feels almost like more vivid in terms of like absorbing the lyrics and the sounds. So they're both like great versions.
So we're seeing Partita tonight. What else are we going to be seeing of yours throughout the festival?
We're doing kind of a remounting of another piece I collaborated with Caroline on called Rise, Wait, Climb Through. That's with mostly a new cast, and Patricia Delgado's been kind of resetting it, which has been great. And then I'm making a new dance. I'm actually performing in it as well. So it's 6 of us. It's a really dynamic group of festival regulars that come, and dancers I love. And it's a special piece because it's in collaboration with the musician, composer, songwriter named Chris Thile. And Chris and I have become friends over the years, and he's just this like, he's an incredible mandolin player, and he writes like the most beautiful poetic songs and lyrics. And so I've kind of curated some of his music, and he's going to perform these songs that he's written live with us, and he's actually going to kind of like move through the dance and through the space. And so we're trying to create this kind of like hybrid of the experience of going to a music concert and the experience of seeing a dance on stage, and what's like, where's the meeting point between those two things. So we don't know what that is yet, but we're exploring that.
Right, and that's what Vail's all about.
Yeah.
The exploratory process. I believe that premieres on August 8th, and will be also performed the following night. But I feel like we've got a lot of people out here who have questions for Justin, so I feel like it's a good time to turn it over to the audience. So if anyone, show of hands, right here. Come on up to the mic. Oh yeah, we can come on up to the mic. Come on up, Sarah. Yeah.
I loved West Side Story, and I wanted to ask which of the dance sequences you most enjoyed doing, or that you maybe felt proudest of after it was all done.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to pick a favorite. I would say the most conflict amongst the creative team was Officer Krupke, and we tried so many different versions of it, and no one was satisfied with it. And we just like, we pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally we created the version that you see in the film, and I love it. I think it's like immaculate in how Steven shot it, and the transitions, and even though it's not like a big dance proper thing, like just the staging of it, I'm really proud of. And then I think America, just because of the scale of it. I mean, we shot that. It took us like 10 days to shoot that number, and in many, many, many different locations all over, from Queens to the Bronx to Paterson, New Jersey. And yet it all fits together over the course of that kind of like 4-minute number. And that was one that I never felt like I could fully trust until I saw it. And then I was, and not even seeing it, because I would work with Steven on the edits, because he edits as we shoot. So there's like an editing trailer that comes to location. And so we would go in and look at stuff in between setups. And it didn't hit me until I saw the whole film and I saw America like in context of everything else, that I was like, oh, this is really like the peak of the film. And so that was really exciting to see that and kind of feel that as well. So.
I have a comment and a question. So my comment is, I hate to admit this, but I'm old enough that I saw West Side Story on stage when it first came out. And that was in the 50s, I think. So I want to tell you that there is no way you can underestimate the impact that had on the audience. We came away feeling like, I've never seen anything like that. And I would say that most of the audience probably lined up with Officer Krupke, more in their attitudes towards people of color and things like that. It wasn't a negative, it was just not there. So I wouldn't want to underestimate that was a big part of that first stage performance. And I mean, we loved it, but we felt, I've never seen anything like this in my life.
Yeah.
Because of what it was saying culturally. So my question has nothing to do with that. It's like, well, yes, it does. It sort of does. I would love to know if in your thinking about film, are you also thinking about the role of film in your dance productions? Is there a role of film for your choreography for the dance stage?
Yeah, I think that working in film has really influenced how I look at building dance during my everyday process. I mean, I've even started to kind of like use some film terminology and language to just talk about like, okay, for this step in this moment, think about it being like a close-up shot so that it feels like there's subtlety to it and doesn't have to feel so like performative and outwardly expressed. It's a more internal thing that we sense. Or even like the way that acting on film, it's like there's so much that can be said just through the eyes and not necessarily through like overdoing facial expressions and even ideas of like, racking focus and thinking about depth and dimension and, like that's all feels like it's interrelated. And I feel like, film is motion pictures. So it's like moving images. And I feel like it's so similar to dance, and that dance is just like movement on stage through space. And so it's like, we don't even realize it, but there is quite a bit of overlap between those two things. And I just want to say one thing about the first comment you said, because it feels to me that like West Side Story it's personal to me in like a generational way, because it's something that my grandfather, James Peck, who was a writer and a civil rights activist, and he was on like the original Freedom Rides into the South, and he loved theater. He loved particularly plays. He wasn't so keen on musicals, but he saw West Side Story and he was just kind of also blown away by that, and he shared it with his kids, so my father and my uncle, and they in turn were just like so influenced by that original production and inspired to continue sharing theater and plays and dance with their children, and that's honestly how I became inspired to embark upon this life in dance and theater and storytelling, is because my dad would bring me to, he made it a priority to expose me to theater in New York. And it was this eye-opening thing, and I was exposed to this whole world of expression and perspectives and just stories that I had never thought of. And everything. They would take me to see everything from Cats to like Hedwig and the Angry Inch off Broadway when I was like 11. I was like, what is this? And that's like been, that's why I'm here right now. So I feel like it goes back to, it's another kind of full circle thing, going back to that original West Side Story production and how it's influenced like my family and then eventually me and the work that I get to share with the world. Yeah.
You want to come on up to the mic? Yeah.
I'm very curious about your process. So you've been compared to Balanchine. He was known to choreograph without music first. And I was interested on what you're inspired by. Are you inspired by the music? Are you inspired by the movement? Do you get frustrated with yourself? Do you surprise yourself? We know that at times you've filmed yourself moving. Do you go back and watch that and then go, I didn't even know that I did that? I'm just interested in how you come up with what you come up with, because it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. It's one of the most difficult processes to articulate too, because it's so, I feel like dance is this like, it's like this ethereal kind of like ephemeral thing that how does it even like come to be, right? But for me, I'm always, when I'm making something for the stage, like most of the time it begins with music. And unless I'm working with a composer on a new piece where it's like it's being written kind of like as we're working, I'll usually spend a good amount of time just like living with a piece of music. Like, for example, with Partita, we talked about earlier, like I listened to that piece for like 10 years before I choreographed it, and on and off. So it's like I would go through these periods where I would be obsessed with listening and then step away and then just let it kind of like seep into my bones. And then eventually, once I work up the courage to like actually make a piece, then a lot of it is done through like, it's like this combination of mathematics and narrative and like personal anecdote, where it's like I'll write out a lot of sort of like counts, and then put in notes horizontally with those counts to kind of describe what it is I'm going to be going for. And then, a big part of the process is being in the studio and by myself and just seeing how I like viscerally respond to the music through my own physicality. And that involves sometimes filming myself so that I can like document a certain phrase and just remember it. But somehow like the process of doing that ingrains the movement into my body. So I don't usually look at them again, but it's like I have to go through the process of like doing that and getting a version that I feel like can exist where like if someone 100 years from now looked back on that, I would be happy with how that looked. Uh-huh. So it's like, it's a lot of, usually I'll film a phrase several times and then just keep the one. And that process like ingrains the movement into my body, and then I don't look at it again. So those are a few.
What about your
formations? Formations. That's a good question. I was always really inspired by large group movement and formations by just coming to see New York City Ballet. Honestly, like seeing, especially like Balanchine work, where I would just watch it from high up and look down on it and try and like wrap my brain around it. And I felt like there weren't a lot of choreographers in the present day when like we were in the school who were interested in that. And I was like, I don't know, maybe it was a little bit of like backlash against that. I was like, I think there needs to be more group movement, and how do I like study this and express it in my own choreography? And so I just was interested in it. And so sometimes if it's like a huge group, I'll do like some sketching, like almost like little like football plays. They're usually like really crude. I mean, like, and now I don't do it as much, but I'll sometimes like the morning before rehearsal, I'll just like do a quick sketch just so I have like a starting point, and then it'll build from there. So
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts. So I was wondering, so as you see your ballets kind of develop and go out into the world, as a choreographer, once you feel like something's finished or you put it on stage for the first time, do you kind of let it go, or do you see it being performed and, kind of look back on it and go, oh, I wish, I did this, or, oh, like maybe I wish I could tell the dancers this, or what's it like to kind of watch your choreography evolve and go out into the ballet world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try and resist the urge to like mess with a piece once it's premiered. I mean, sometimes I'll make little tweaks to it, but it's almost like it's like a record of a moment in time. So it's like, and sometimes it's hard to look back on those works, and it's like I feel creatively that there's like a forward motion, and the way I think about dance is not how I thought about it 10 years ago. And but there are works that I'm like, oh, I like that one. Like Increases. This ballet, which was my first piece for New York City Ballet, Increases, I'm like, oh, that feels like a pure kind of representation of my work in terms of like the group work and the individual choreographic phrases and how I responded to the music and stuff like that. But then there's it's like You're the Rabbit, which is another ballet I made that in my first year making work at New York City Ballet, where I'm like, I don't really want to look at that anymore. But some people still like it. So I don't want to like steal the joy from others.
Can I tell you a fun fact? You brought up Increases. So Daisy, who just asked that question, danced the Partita in it when I staged it at IU last year. So she knows it pretty well.
Oh, no way. Okay. How was it?
It was like one of the most fulfilling ballets I've ever been able to do. So
Oh.
It was an incredible experience.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing to hear that. And I'm so glad Michael got to go and work with y'all. And I heard only amazing things about that run of Increases at IU. So,
Well, thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you, Justin. And we hope you all come to see the performance tonight and every following performance here at the Vail Dance Festival. Thank you so much.
thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michael.